Hey, it's Eric G. Around the House is sponsored by Baldwin Hardware. For 75 years, Baldwin Hardware has been known for its first-class quality and craftsmanship in door and cabinetry hardware. As an alumnus of the Baldwin Hardware Design Council, I can say I have seen the details and quality from design to the finished product. If you're looking for a new style and old-world craftsmanship, I can tell you there is only one Baldwin Hardware. Check out what would look great in your home at baldwinhardware.com.
It's Around the House.
So here's what I do usually when I walk into a house, for instance, and this is some good information. I'll walk in as a designer there. Oh, we're going to blow this out and do this. It's like, all right, well, let's explore this real quick. So what I typically do is say, hey, is there a basement down below? And if they say yes, great. I go down below and see, is there a wall or a post underneath where that wall is? So I figure out where the wall is upstairs. I go down below and figure out where that is. And if it's an unfinished basement, it's so easy because you can see if there's anything that's carrying that load. If it's just normal floor joists and there's not a beam or a post there, that's a good sign.
When it comes to remodeling and renovating your home, there is a lot to know, but we've got you covered. This is Around the House.
Welcome to Around the House with Eric G. and Caroline B. This is where we talk home improvement every single week. Thanks for joining us. We got a great show ahead. Hello, Caroline. How's it on the other side of the country today?
Hello, everybody. How are you? So much going on.
Oh, man. This is going to be a great episode, and we've even got one following this that's going to be absolutely amazing where we're taking it outside. But today, let's talk about, in this least first couple of segments, toxic wood.
That's pretty funny. I actually learned something in this episode. I did not know this. And I mean, I sort of knew it. I think in the back of your mind, you know that woods can be very aromatic. And we're talking about all kinds of lumber and the types of lumber that you use. But I didn't really think to this extent that you would have to be this careful when you were cutting lumber or storing it or whatnot.
You know, I've been a woodworker over the years, not like had the huge full wood shop, but working in cabinet shops and stuff. As on the design side of things, there are some woods that you just don't use because it can be a problem. And some of it can make you pretty sick. It's just the same with like auto body. If you've got an auto body person that's working in an auto body shop, you can become sensitized to those auto body chemicals. So maybe you're doing, all of a sudden one day you can be allergic to lacquer thinner, which is what you clean a lot of stuff with. And then you're kind of out of work. So it's one of those things, if you didn't wear your respirator over the years, many times, boom, there's one day you wake up and you're sick and you can't get anywhere near it.
Do you know that I dated someone who actually became allergic to the pizza dough flour?
Whoa.
So their father owned pizzerias, and he had worked in a pizzeria his whole life. And then halfway through working there, he developed this, I guess, an allergy to the flour. You know how you throw the pizzas around, and he couldn't be around it anymore. Couldn't do it. Same thing.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. And now we've got the same thing with wood. But woods, these aromatics that they put off, or VOCs, volatile organic compounds, can be highly toxic. So let's kind of dive into the types of wood and the ones that we should stay away from.
Absolutely. You know, and it's funny, you know, wood can be interesting when you're making sawdust, right? And it's depending on, you know, how your body is sensitized to this stuff. So if you think about wood, you've got different ways of working with it. Maybe you've got something that's very raw, that's not dry. So maybe it's a tree that you cut in your backyard and you're going to, you know, get a mill and cut it up into pieces and dry it out. Many times that cured or undried, like kiln dried wood is going to be more likely to cause a sensitive area with you than not. Because many times you can have, like, between the bark and the wood, there can be, you know, things in there that are allergens that can get you sensitized to that. So that's some of the things you got to start out with that could be very problematic, you know. And
that kills me when you're out and they're cutting up trees and they throw it into the chipper and they start throwing that air, all that stuff in the air as they chip that fresh wood. Oh my God. My eyes start watering.
Yep,
I feel like it's in my throat. I feel like I've got some kind of asthma.
Well, you think about it, excessive exposure to certain kinds of wood dust, that's sawdust, can cause ailments, like bronchial asthma, a consistent runny nose, a hypersensitivity type to pneumonia. And ODTS, which is organic dust toxic syndrome, bronchitis, allergic dermatitis. So there's a lot of things, including, which is on the very extreme, this is not all the time, if you're working with it every day, you can get things like nasal cancers, are rare, but they can occur, especially if you're working all the time in a, like a wood shop where you're working in a furniture shop or a cabinet shop, maybe not so much as a hobbyist, but if you're a professional, it absolutely can. And some of the woods like beech and oak can cause that. And those are common woods.
Those are very common. There was one that you had on the list, which I found fascinating, which was like really toxic. You were familiar with it and you said, oh, this is something you don't want to work with.
Yeah, let's go down this list and talk about this. And one thing we were talking about earlier here, just to pay attention to, is the microorganisms in bark. And there's funguses and stuff that are in there that can be the problem too. So if you're doing a woodworking project and you've got maybe that raw edge on the outside that has the bark on it, that's again one of those things that you got to be careful with. But here's kind of one general rule before we dive into name by name on this. Subtropical and tropical woods typically have the more, they have the biggest reaction out of people. So like even Western red cedar, sequoia, redwood, cocobolo, woods like that are the most likely to cause problems, where woods from temperate climates are much less extreme. So, like large walnut, oak, beech, yew, and pine have a less of a reaction.
Because pine is so aromatic. Like we know when we test air quality, apinene, which is a volatile organic that comes off pine, we can tell when people have done remodeling and things like that because they'll have a lot of it in the air.
Yeah.
So these things have these VOCs, but like redwood throws me because I love redwood. I mean, I think, and it seems to me like I always thought of that as being like a non sort of toxic, very aromatically benign wood.
Well, no,
and
but
here it's on the list.
Think about this. Redwood is used and Western red cedar is used for fences and decks, right? It's because bugs don't eat it.
So there's something in redwood too.
You see what I mean? That's if the bugs don't eat it, then guess what? Maybe there's a reason we shouldn't be eating it too. Because if they're going, hey, we're not touching that stuff, maybe that's the issue, right?
I've often felt that way about cedar closets because it's got an or an insecticide sort of built into it. Yeah. So I kind of refuse to put it in my home. And I know it's cedar. Some people say, oh, I love a cedar closet. I have it. I have multiple cedar closets. I don't like that aromatic smell that it gives to my clothes, like after I put them in there. And then also I always felt like, well, if it can kill a bug, is it really good for me to have in the house?
Exactly.
On my clothes all day?
So you think about it, you start going through some of the common woods, and we'll do this before we go out to break. Like hard rock maple, very common with cabinetry, doing furniture. That is something that just that dust, breathing it in, can affect lung function. So just something as simple and benign as hard rock maple is a little interesting, Alder, which is another softer wood, used in cabinetry, furniture. It's, 20 years ago, it was kind of known as the cheap man's cherry because you could stain it to look a lot like, a cherry wood. But it's common. It's fairly dangerous to work with as a tree cutting it down. You have to be careful with it. But dermatitis, rhinitis, bronchial problems, all from alder sawdust, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah.
And then when you start getting into these things, and again, some of these things you don't use a lot of, but again, yellow birch, dermatitis, respiratory problems, and again, that's a big one there. Now, boxwood, which is another one, that's a sensitizer. So you get dermatitis, irritant to eyes, nose, and throat.
Remember our friend Nikki Kruger at Thermostor and Santa Fe Products, 50% of the air in your upstairs is from your basement. So when you're doing stuff down there, folks, you have to remember that it's getting upstairs. 50% of that air is coming up and you're breathing it.
Exactly. So that's another one of those. Now, here's some of the more exotic woods you got to be careful with. And let's go out to break here first. Got to run out and pay the bills here. We come back. I want to talk about some of the more toxic stuff. We'll do that just as soon as Around the House returns.
Why, in a world of ugly faces, should I be allowed to be so hot?
Bless you. Man, you have been fighting. You've been fighting allergies for a month or two now. What's going on?
I don't know. I think I've got mold.
You've got
Mold in my building.
Well, you guys had all the flooding and stuff. I'm not surprised. You should go to examinair.com and see what you've got in that air. So that way you might be able to deal with it because you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, I need to figure it out. You're right. Examinair.com. I'll go there.
Go to examinair.com.
Hey, I'm Rudy Wade, and you're listening to Around the House with Eric G. and Caroline B. Listen to my music to improve your home.
You got me thinking about the day we move along. You have me singing in your head like your favorite.
Welcome back to the Around the House show where we talk home improvement every single weekend. Thanks for joining us. Well, during the commercial break, I decided to go out and take a COVID test since I had people I was at my concert with a few weeks ago here. All of a sudden, people are coming down with it.
Uh-oh. And you do
But
have
I'm looking negative today.
Yeah, and you do have a sore throat. Feel a little congested.
Yeah.
So we'll know by the end of the show. Does Eric have COVID?
Well,
or
no.
not?
So far, so good, right?
I don't think you've got it. I think he's just got a
I don't
cold.
think so either. Yeah, but I don't know. And we're not going to get into the whole COVID debate, but when you got friends and family that have it that you were hanging out with a few days ago, worth taking a look at. Worth taking a look at. Well, we've been talking about toxic woods, and, I love woodworking, but you got to be a little careful with this, right? And you and I dove into this off air like last week, and we're like, this is such a great subject.
Because nobody thinks about it. They just, you don't think when you're cutting a 2x4 or you're cutting down a tree or you're cutting anything that you could be exposed to something that's potentially toxic. And chances are a one-time instance is not going to make you sick. But if you're someone who works around it continuously, then yes, you got to worry and take proper PPE.
Yeah. So like great example, cocobolo, which is another exotic wood. It's beautiful. Love it. That sawdust and the wood. So not just the sawdust, but even touching the wood and working with it. Is a sensitizer, irritant to skin, nose and throat. You can get conjunctivitis, nausea, bronchial asthma, wheezing, chest tightness, and headache.
Wow.
And that's from the dust and contact with the wood.
Interesting.
Ebony. You think about ebony, used dark wood.
Beautiful.
You can use it in guitars and musical instruments and, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, that's so true. Manufacturing.
Yeah.
Products.
Irritant, dermatitis, conjunctivitis, sneezing, possible skin sensitizer. So again, these are things that you've got to be really careful with when you're out there working. Now, one of my favorite ones that I use a lot in woodworking is sapele, which is a type of mahogany. So a lot of times you'll see in cabinetry that mahogany with the wave in it that's got a really cool look. I use that sapele mahogany all the time in projects. Love it in kitchen cabinets, skin irritation, sneezing, And it's crazy how much of these things, when you're doing it, ash, decrease in lung function, and that's a common wood. So
I'm wondering too, if you have a sensitivity to any of these woods and you put cabinetry in your house, could it cause an issue? Like we know woods have formaldehyde in them all the time, which can contribute. That's a naturally occurring thing. Like if you have a wood allergy to pine, would you be sneezing?
Probably not, just because, when a finished cabinetry is really sealed on all sides. So it's got a layer of finish over it. So there's not much to that where you would still see that. Now, if you're in there cutting moldings and stuff, yeah, absolutely you could during construction. But after it's done, it's pretty sealed off. If it was finished correctly, there's not part of that wood that's really exposed. And you'd have to be really, really sensitive. And you're not really touching the cabinetry that much anyway. And the places you are, there's multiple layers of finish.
We are talking in the midweek special. So if you are listening on the radio or the podcast, my mom had an instance where she put in new flooring and they got.
Oh, you just outed her, by the way, Caroline, because we said we didn't say who it was.
Let's do this.
Oh, she's gonna get me. She's going to get me. But she did have an instance. They were cutting all of the wood in her home and she got wood dust everywhere. And she woke up the next day like short of breath. And, you know, and with a big mess on her hands. So this can easily happen when contractors come in to do work. You can end up with a nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's another wood that I love working with, Wenge. It is very dangerous. Splinters go septic.
Oh, yeah, this is
irritation
the one.
of eyes, skin and respiratory system, dermatitis, giddiness, drowsiness, visual problems, stomach cramps, and sensitizer. And that's with the dust and the wood.
You got me at goes septic in Splinters Go Septic. And there was something about Doug Fir. Wasn't Doug Fir one of the ones that had?
Yeah, we'll get to that here in a minute too.
Oh my God. I'm afraid of wood.
Here's one that I knew that I don't. It's a very exotic wood, but a burra. And again, not a common wood that you go get at the home center. That one, from dust and splinters, causes vomiting, nausea, giddiness, eye irritation, and the short splinters are nearly impossible to remove.
Oh my God. See?
So dangerous, right? Very dangerous.
Scary.
And again, it's depending on what, how you are with this stuff. You could probably, there will be people right now that are listening to the show that are going, I've done this for 30 years and I've not had an issue.
Of course. There's always that.
And you're 100% right. I know guys that worked in wood shops for 40 years that had not a single issue with this. And then somebody that works in there for 7 could have major health issues.
Well, so
this is not an exact science.
At any given time, too, you can get a piece of wood in your eye. I mean, it's happened to me so many times, like a little splinter or just, debris from the wood and your eye turns all nasty and you get conjunctivitis.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked with Purple Heart before. That can make you feel not great. That's nasal irritation, nausea. I've had that happen to me. Spruce, another one, respiratory problems, irritation in nose and throat. Pine, irritant, decrease in lung function, allergic bronchial asthma, rhinitis, and dermatitis.
What's with the Doug Fir? Because that's my thing. I'm always using Doug Fir.
We'll get to that. We're working down the list. We're not going to cut in line here. So, American cherry, common, wheezing, giddiness. That explains all the craziness that happened out in the wood shop at times. You
giddiness. That's like,
yeah, might explain our show sometimes. And then here we go, Caroline. Doug Fir. See, dermatitis, nasal cancer. Think about that.
I use a lot of Doug Fir. How's your COVID test coming over there?
Let's see. Negative.
Of course. You got a cold.
I got a cold.
I'm glad.
I'll be fine.
I'm glad about that.
Doug Fir, splinters go septic.
That's the one. Guys, don't get splinters. So how do I protect myself? What do I need? I need PPE. I need gloves.
Caroline, that's a really good question because safety precautions are big when you're working with wood. And again, that traditional basement woodworking is not the best place in the house due to, like we talked about earlier, everything going up inside the house. Mm-hmm. But the best rules are working in a well-ventilated area with adequate dust extraction system. Mm. So the rules on that are pretty easy, but always check to see what OSHA in your area says is the safest way. There are actually codes for that, so you can follow that.
There you go, guys.
So be careful. All right, we come back. Let's run out to break here, Caroline. We come back. Yep. Let's get into the debate of load-bearing walls. Can you open that space up or not? Sound good?
Yeah, both of these topics. I'm learning something. I like it.
All right, we'll do that just as soon as Around the House returns.
Hey guys, you're listening to Around the House with Eric G and Caroline B. I'm Zeke Sky, and I'm going to show you how to shred it out while you're building it up.
Welcome back to the Around the House show, where we talk home improvement every single week. Hey, if you want to get a hold of us, a lot of different ways you can do that. Head over to the website, aroundthehouseonline.com. You can contact us there. We're on social media. We're just about everywhere out there. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter.
LinkedIn.
We have our own closed group on Facebook, which is Around the House Nation. That is where we have a closed group there. So make sure you join up to that. So Caroline, we're going to dive into a deep subject that is always a hot one, load-bearing walls.
And it's always confusing because I am the type of person that loves to take walls out. I'm like, I'll just take it out. I want open space, which could be
How many times do you see that on HGTV?
Yes.
I mean, it's like the beginning of every demo day show, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're in there with the sledgehammer and the sawzall, and they're pushing the wall down, and they've got the glasses and the boots, and half of these people, you can tell they don't even know how to use the power tools they have in their hands, but that's just what it is. Here's the problem, though. That wall could easily be holding up the upper floor or the ceiling of that house, and that could be a huge issue.
And so a lot of the criteria that I look at online, so we were looking at what they tell you online, don't go by it because it's absolutely false. Like they were saying, if it runs parallel to your joist, it's okay. No, it's not. I've seen it where that is not true.
Yeah, and here's what it is. So you think of load is where you have a point that is carrying weight from the top all the way down to the foundation. But the problem is that you can have beams that span below that carry the load that move that over to the side. So you can have it where it goes over, goes down, goes over, goes down. So you really have to have a full understanding. And the only real way to know if it is truly load bearing is to get the structural engineer involved and have them take a look at it and say, no load. But here's the technical part of it. There's always a little load.
On everything.
Almost always there's a little bit of load there.
Interesting.
So here's one of the rules that I have. And again, I've been doing this for years. And, that's the common thing is, okay, if the joist, above or the ceiling above runs parallel, maybe. But what can happen is that floor joist or anything else up there could have a wall that's above that. If you're on a first floor and maybe you've got bedrooms upstairs, right? And you're going to blow out that wall between the dining room and the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to open it up. We're going to have a great room right here. This is going to be amazing. Problem is you could have a beam upstairs that comes over and lands on that floor joist, right?
Of course.
And that wall is carrying that down to the basement. So, it's running perpendicular. Yeah, it's no problem. You might have to sister up that floor joist that's above it and make it thicker like a beam to carry the load and move it out to the outside walls. And that's where you need that engineer to specify if you can just put up another few 2x10s or whatever you have to do up there to carry that load.
I like to take walls out.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. I've taken out the wall between my dining room and living room. I've taken out the wall in the basement, which was sort of like a utility room that went into not a utility room, but a room that was sort of attached to the utility room that went into the living area space. So I made it all bigger there. But yeah, it was kind of complicated and you're relying on the contractor. You're hoping your contractor knows what they're doing because that's what I did because I wasn't really sure. It wasn't, clear cut.
So here's what I do usually when I walk into a house, for instance, and this is some good information. I'll walk in as a designer there. Oh, we're going to blow this out and do this. It's like, all right, well, let's explore this real quick. So what I typically do is say, hey, is there a basement down below? And if they say yes, great. I go down below and see, is there a wall or a post underneath where that wall is? So I figure out where the wall is upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
I go down below and figure out where that is. And if it's an unfinished basement, it's so easy because you can see if there's anything that's carrying that load. If it's just normal floor joists and there's not a beam or a post there, that's a good sign. Okay, there's nothing that's carrying that down to the foundation down here that's out of the ordinary. So that's a good sign. And then you have to go up and kind of look in the space above it, whether it's the floor above or if there's an attic space. Many times if you have an older home that's like pre-trusses, right? The trusses with the stamped metal plates on them, that's the ceiling system up there for the roof. If you've got that, you're pretty good. Many times that's designed to span the space up above it. Where it gets more interesting is when they've stick framed it like they did in the 40s or the 30s, the 20s, or before that. Because sometimes there'll be like one brace that comes down and lands right over the top of that. Now you got, hundreds of pounds of load versus thousands of pounds of load.
I had to brace a support beam in the attic, which was really interesting. One day my contractor went up there and I can't remember what we were doing, what we were looking for. And he's like, wow. He's like, your support beam's actually got a crack in it. And I'm like, oh my God, that was in this. And so they had to brace that. So that's a good thing to look for too. Like if you're ever up in your attic or places where you can see this type of structure, basement too, you should always check out for this kind of stuff because it can happen over time, storms, distribution.
Yeah, let's dive off on that for a second, because one of the biggest problems you see out there with load like that is those posts in the basement. So you think about the post that goes up, your typical basement, old basement floor. So you got a wood post that's maybe a 4x4 or 6x6 that's holding things up.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that post many times is just sitting there with the end grained on the floor. That's taking moisture, and the moisture is doing what a tree does, right? It's sucking that up, capillary action right up the top. So as the years go by, you don't see it. That post gets
weaker,
30 seconds shorter, 30 seconds shorter,
and weaker,
30 seconds shorter. And all of a sudden it's getting shorter, which means you've got now a dip in the floor. So that's the key right there, is to make sure that post isn't sitting down there with some kind of a vapor barrier piece underneath it. It could be a piece of tar shingle. It could be, a piece of tar paper, something to keep moisture from wicking up in the bottom of that post. Or go steel.
Now, when you go into a basement, you see all of those, usually I see them here on the Northeast, but a lot of those metal or steel poles, right, that run through a basement. That's all your support for the first floor.
Yeah. So great example. I think I've talked about this on the radio before. We had a house that I was in, and they had a sump pump that was pumping that trough drain system around the outside. And it was faulty. They designed this poorly, and it was taking the soil out from underneath the foundation. So if that house would have sank because there was a void underneath the foundation walls, the walls would have moved down about a foot, but the posts in the middle wouldn't have moved. So all of a sudden it would have pushed the floor up in the middle a foot. So it would have just like been a backbreaker, right? Just it would have shoved the middle of the house. It'd been like jacking the middle of the house up by a foot.
It would have been like a pyramid shape. Everything on the sides would come
would
down.
Have just shoved everything up, destroyed the house. So that's very key in that. And that's why, when you're talking about posts in a basement, one, you want to have them so they're not getting shorter. You want to make sure if they are, it's not a bad DIY project to replace those. And we can talk about that. But those structural posts are key. And the nice thing is you want to make sure they're fastened down to the concrete footing correctly. Because if you have an earthquake or something happen, you don't want those things to kick out. You want them to stay exactly where they are. And that's one of the things when you pay to have an earthquake retrofit done in these old homes, they will brace those down to the floor below. They'll screw into the concrete, fasten there, and then they will fasten all those floor joists, beams, and posts with metal brackets together so you have one solid system. So it doesn't, get moved off the foundation.
It's interesting because I think in my attic, going back to this reinforcing of the support beam, that probably happened from a storm or wind shear or something that we had during, I would suspect, one of the big hurricanes that we had. So these things do all kinds of stuff, whether it's an earthquake or any kind of, massive shear or wind or pressure on the house. It creates, these structural issues.
Okay, well, when we come back, let's talk a little bit more about that. And I think that's a good topic to tie into this. We'll do that just as soon as Around the House returns.
Hi everybody, I'm Ari Amin from Steven Adler's band, and you are listening to Around the House with Eric G and the beautiful Caroline.
Welcome back to the Around the House show. We've been talking today about a number of different topics. We're talking about poisonous wood that we were woodworking with, and now we're talking about making sure that load-bearing wall, if you remove it, is, well, load-bearing or not, right, Caroline?
Right. Is it okay to take a wall out during construction? And how do you know? So give me like a clue. If I'm chopping away at that drywall and I break through the wall, is there something I should be looking for or see that's going to say, uh-oh, Karen, don't do that.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah. And I want to talk about this. This is another thing we'll talk about too, is going to be some bracing and stuff and tying that down, because we were talking about that before we go out to break. But one of the things that I want to make sure is that, that when you're tearing that out, there's a lot of rumors out there. If it's got a double top plate, like two 2x4 stacked on top of each other, it's load bearing. No, not necessarily. Could be that they just built it that way. Doesn't have to be that they built it one way to be load bearing. I mean, it's a clue. These are all clues. But those are things to take a look at. But many times what you have to be careful with is if you start to see like a hallway, like down the middle of the house, right? You got this hallway wall that goes down the middle of the house, and maybe it stops for a little bit and then continues on in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Very easily, that could be two pieces of wood are resting on that, and that is that scissor point that's holding it up. So those middle of the span walls, you got to be very careful with. I've had soffits in the kitchen where they're built down be structural. I've had that little pantry cabinet be structural because they had to hide a post and it's in the side of the pantry. So let's make a pantry out of it. And you're thinking, I'm just taking a closet out. How bad can it be? Well, it can be pretty bad. So really the first thing you want to do is have that, have your structural engineer come out and take a look at it. I don't even trust a lot of contractors on it. I will really want, if you're taking out a wall that could be structural, I want that absolute, nope, you're good, take it out.
And also windows. Like I like to expand windows all the time and make them bigger. And Eric really made me aware of the fact that, you've got to be careful when you're doing that because it's going to change the shear on the home. It does all types of things. So guess who I've got in my phone now? Structural engineer. He's on my speed dial because
we got people who are going, what's shear? Well, think about it racking, like when you build a building up or a shed and it's kind of moving sideways, where it's kind of coming out of square, leaning. That's what shear is. And so that's what those sheets do. So the more windows, the more shear. So sometimes you have to put steel in there. I've had to do steel walls.
See?
So
you can't just take stuff out.
No.
You got to have professionals to make sure you can do it.
No, and I want to talk about this here too, because this is something that's very, while you're doing these projects, I want you to be putting in the right anchors and brackets that would be normally used in code today. Like Caroline, in your neck of the woods, I would start, as I'm remodeling, I would start putting in some of the hurricane tie downs that you see maybe down in Florida, the Carolinas, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to be, speaking of Florida, I'm going to be down for the Southeastern Building Conference emceeing down there, August 3rd and 4th in Kissimmee, Florida at the Gaylord Convention Center. So come down and say hi. The reason why I'm mentioning that is I'm going to be talking down there doing a presentation with QuickTie. These are guys that build those straps and cables that hold walls and stuff down during hurricanes. So they actually have a cable that you can string all the way up that wall from the foundation that goes in and ties that top plate down, and the cable goes down and attaches to the foundation that holds the It's basically a tension tie that holds the top of the roof down onto the foundation.
Amazing.
So that's where those.
It's like giant tie downs for your house.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's trippy.
Yeah. So it
I like
goes
that.
through, it bolts up, it grabs the side of the truss in your roof. You drill a hole and that quick tie goes all the way down and ties in down below. So it makes it so you've got something that's going to be really strong. It's not just that little hurricane clip that you have. You've actually got a cable that's holding the whole thing down and you're not pulling that apart. So it's really a key to providing that structure.
When would you install that? Like if you're putting in windows, taking out a window, like a big project, or how is that going?
I would do it if I have an exterior wall opened up.
Mhm.
If I've got the wall opened up and it's going down to the basement or a crawl space, if that wall was opened up with the drywall's out, it wouldn't be a bad idea to put some of those in.
How many do you need? Like say let's say you had a 2,000 square foot house, like a rectangle platform. Let's just say.
That's hard. You really have to engineer that in there, and code's going to tell you that too, like in Florida. But I would at least want to have it around doors and window openings and in the corners. Each corner, tying that corners down, and then in the middle around doors and openings.
Interesting.
That way you've got it. And man, you do that and you're pretty good. That's really going to hold stuff down. And again, that's going to help too in an earthquake, because how many times do I see with tornadoes, right? That house you see the house, but it's off the foundation. So many homes were built back in the day before 1960s code in most places didn't require you to have any fastener to hold the wood. It was just sitting on the foundation.
I wonder if my house is like that. It's 1960. It's probably sitting on the foundation.
Toss a coin. You have a place where you can see up there, it's unfinished in the ceiling, where you can see the floor joists?
I don't know. I'd have to take a look.
Laundry room, utility room that's unfinished ceiling?
No. But I mean, I've been up there. I don't think I've ever looked for that particular thing.
In the basement, take a look up in there, because there'll be you can put your hand up on the flat wood, which is a sill plate, and you'll feel a bolt.
Yeah. Oh, I'll have to, where I can look? I have a crawl space under the stairs where you can kind of go through and you can see up onto the sill plate and all that. I'll look.
Yeah,
I'm just looking for, I've never seen it though. Would I notice it?
You won't notice it probably, but you put a glove on, because there could be spiders and crap up there, but just reach up there and feel if there's a bolt. If there's not, then that's just the weight of the house holding it down to the foundation.
I'm going to check it out. I'll let you guys know next week.
Yeah. But then that's an easy fix though. You can go through. Now this requires drywall patching. You can go through and put those hurricane straps, which you bolt into the concrete, into the top of the wood, and you can strap the whole house down that way. So, you see that with tornadoes, especially, in the Midwest, you'll see houses just completely, they look like they just got picked up and put in the middle of the road.
And, a friend of mine just told me today, I was texting with him this morning, they just had a tornado and got substantial damage in Maryland. These things are happening all over. We used to think like, oh, you're in Tornado Alley or you're in Texas or Oklahoma or Tennessee, you're going to get these really bad tornadoes, but pretty much you're open to this happening anywhere. So it sounds like just good safety.
Yeah. I mean, it just happens. It just happens. I mean, you take one of these older homes and they've literally just been lifted up and moved. And all of a sudden, it just wasn't attached to the foundation anymore. So these are things you want to be careful with. I mean, I'll show you a picture right here that's just a great example of that, where the wind came through and literally blew it right off the foundation. And that's only because...
Oh, look at that. I had to look at his picture close up. It looks like it almost looks like you have a garden in front of the house because the house has been moved off the foundation. Yeah. So I had to look, and the whole house is in the back of the foundation. Yeah. But it looks like it's like a deck or a porch now.
Yeah, it looks like a deck or a porch, but that's the crawl space.
Oh, man.
So those are serious things, serious things to consider when you're working on the house. And these are things that I want you to think about while you're taking out walls and doing this stuff. Make sure that you've got, add those right footings down below if you're moving stuff, That's part of the process too, is when you get that structural engineer involved, and I just kind of want to wrap it around this really nicely. Many times when you have to put a beam in, they're going to say, okay, you're going to put a beam, you got it. But then all of a sudden down in the basement, you might have to dig up where that post is now and put in a 4 foot by 4 foot footing down there to carry the new weight up above. So you might have to do some work in the basement or a big, huge post and pier in the crawl space just to carry that load so it doesn't ever move. Because you think about many old homes, that concrete on your basement floor is only inch or two. It could be a rat slab where it's less than an inch thick.
Yeah, like this picture he just showed us. You can't see it. You should post this on Around the House. But
yeah,
it's literally the house has just been moved backwards, and you see like it looks like almost like maybe 4 or 5 rows of brick. You know, it just looks like this really light foundation.
It's like you just went out and went pop and just tapped it and it spun out. You know, it's like the house spun off its foundation.
If you're building now, I mean, in these times, I think it would be smart just to have this as an extra added thing. I mean, it doesn't seem.
But hey, Caroline, I hear the music. You know what that means? It's time to go. I'm Eric G.
And I'm Caroline B.
And you've been listening to
Around the House.
Hey, it's Eric G from Around the House. Are you planning a decking or siding project this year? If you are, you've got to check out my friends at Millboard. Millboard is a completely different kind of composite decking and cladding that enhances outdoor spaces with enduring distinction. Hand-molded from the finest oak, it realistically mimics the natural grain and color of premium hardwood. If you're looking for something that doesn't look like plastic and instead real wood, check out millboard.com. Make sure and check out that interview we did just a few weeks back. That's millboard.com.